Good morning, Diana. Good morning. Michelle wants to play. Awesome. Awesome. Good afternoon, Carmen. Buenas tardes. Oh, boa tarde. That's Portuguese. Oh, I guess I should say if anyone's watching the recording right now, we're going to start in a little bit. Just going to hang out for a few, let some folks join us. Happy Tuesday, Linda. Linda, you disappeared on me. There's still a spot for you. And actually, I'm officially 70% gone. There's 30% left. And so, get on it, sister. Come hang out with us. Okay. Okay. Welcome. Well, work it out. Work it out. I really think that's going to be gone soon. I wouldn't be surprised. Because there's of that you want, there's one. So it's got your name on it. Oh my goodness, we're going to have so much fun. Super sweet time. Okay. Shall we dance? Yes. I should say that I'm playfully just a little bit nervous about this one. But let's dive in. Welcome to the program. This is it. It's happening. Holding space for love. My goodness. This is episode 35, which that sounds like a lot compared to one. And it doesn't sound like much compared to 1,000. So I guess we are just where we are. We can see it as beautiful. We can see it as totally enough. Welcome to the show. My name's Tiger Singleton. I'm the host. And what do? My goodness. I guess I just do whatever I do, and I end up sharing insight and wisdom. Some people like it, so some people watch. That's pretty simple. So if this is your first time, you're going to find out if you like it or not. Welcome to the show. The title today, Heaven is Now. Wake up, Buttercup. I'm going to dive into that. And this topic, well, I guess we should just briefly mention the flow of the program. If you're new, if this is your first time, we're going to finish the introduction happening now. Then we're going to do 2 minutes of stillness, which is where I don't say anything and allow myself to just sit in presence, totally be here, relax, not rush. And then from that stillness, we will transition into the part where I run my mouth for 30 or 40 minutes talking about the topic. Then if there's any questions from the live audience, we will address those. And then we'll end with a super short and sweet guided meditation. It's going to be a good time. So let's just do it. Let's start with the 2 minutes of stillness. And I invite you to hang out with me in that stillness, especially if you're going to be here for an hour, and just embrace it. I know it can be weird, right? No one's saying anything. Nothing's happening. But no, just be there. Just be here with me in that stillness. And then we'll let the moment be the moment. Ready, set, go. Okay. Feeling good. Feeling calm. Feeling like I'm less nervous now about this one. Why am I nervous? Not really, but playfully, because I understand the potential to misunderstand what I'm saying, think I'm saying things that I'm not saying, and then also the potential for what I'm saying to destroy illusions. And that's not always fun. So that's a bit of a disclaimer that this isn't serious. You are free to see whatever you see. Okay? I'm not here trying to tell other people how they should see, what they should do, any of that nonsense. I'm sharing what I see from behind this heart and eyes, and if you enjoy it, great. If not, no worries. But I am going to dig into some things that I know some people find to be serious and important, and I don't. So that could be a foundation for some emotional disturbances. I am going to talk about heaven and hell from a playful context that focuses on the pointer rather than clinging to the stories. And I'm also going to talk about this in the context of all spiritual and religious traditions that in some way tell this same story. And then to summarize, hopefully, how this all speaks to a present moment opportunity having nothing to do with what happens after you die. Spoiler alert. Okay. And again, I'm just going to mention that I might just do this every time. Mention the pre-broadcast reflections because I enjoy writing them. And I know at least Sita enjoys reading them. So if you want sneak peeks before I go live and read what's on my heart and mind, you might want to check that out. I write a little bit about the topic. And what I loved about my personal inquiry in this was asking myself the question, how do you point to something that is just so beyond words? Like, how do you communicate something that can't actually be defined or spoken? And very simply, what we do as human beings is we tell stories. We use words to illustrate something that invites the listener or the reader or the observer to experience it directly for themselves. For example, if we ask the question, what is vanilla? Now, you could write a book about it. You could write 100 stories about it. But your stories don't say anything about the reality of the experience for the one who experiences vanilla. And granted, everyone's going to have different experiences. But say it's like your favorite flavor, and then you come across someone who doesn't have a tongue. And they ask you, what does vanilla taste like? No matter what you say, it's not the truth. What you're saying is a form of play that's attempting to communicate a direct experience. But if somebody was really going to know vanilla, one would have to come into direct contact with it. And I find this to be so beautiful because we can spend enormous amounts of time trying to figure out the truth of something, but yet we don't have a direct experience. But then when you have a direct experience, what you also recognize is that you can't definitely define it. All you can do is tell stories. And that's beautiful too. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just monumentally important to recognize that if you want to know what's true, we have to be willing to see that it's not a mind issue. Like thinking and thinking and thinking is to think about your thinking. And all of that takes place in the imagination. It's not happening in reality. What is real and what is true is what is here and now. It's what's real. And as it relates to the spiritual discovery, or even to go so far as to say the truth of life, what life really is, this cannot be spoken about. In the same way that I can say that life is XYZ. Everyone listening hears a different XYZ. This is hilarious, right? It's like I could come up with a story that says, okay, life is this, and it's not that, but it's this also. And then everyone hears something different. Just like in these little talks that I give, right? Sometimes I say something and someone will think, wow, that is really true. And then another person hears the same thing and you're like, that sounds like nonsense. You see what's happening here? It's not a matter of if it's right or wrong. It's an issue of what does it point to within yourself for you to connect with. And granted, a particular insight or a sentence could expose a profound revelation inside the one who's interpreting. Hold on. And this is exactly what's going on with the story of heaven and hell. Is that at some point, someone recognized something really profound and they asked the question, how do I share this? How can I communicate this wisdom? How can I communicate this opportunity? And then a story was born. And you'll find this in every religious tradition, that there is essentially a story that attempts to communicate the fundamental spiritual opportunity. Notice this. Every religion, every tradition points to a spiritual opportunity that somehow is the remedy to suffering. And how many of these stories are there? And how many people think their story is the right story? It's adorable. And here's why. Here's why that happens. You come in contact with a story, and it opens something on the inside of you, and you connect with something so profound about what you are and what life is. There's an immensity of beauty seen. And in that experience, we attribute it to the story. We say, oh, this experience is profoundly beautiful and true, so the story must be true. And then in order to hold on to that experience, we hold on to the story. And then we encounter other stories and we say, hold on. If that story is true, then my story might not be true, which means what I discovered might not be true. But it was so real. It was so beautiful. So that other story must be wrong. Because it can't be both, right? It can't be this and that. It's got to be one or the other. My goodness. You know what this is like? This is like two people encountering the miracle of a tree. And they say, wow, that's extraordinary. And then they spend the rest of their lives arguing about the name of the tree. What to call it. And throughout their life arguing, they've divorced themselves from the beauty of what they experienced. That was indefinable. That was beyond all names. And now these two people are going to war with each other, dropping bombs, in order to defend their own story. And this is incredibly understandable, especially in the way that human beings function, where we have these experiences and then we have these stories and then we identify with the stories. We feel like the story tells us who we are. I am this, I am that, and this is true. And so if we stumble upon the possibility that the story's not true, then it means I don't know who I am anymore. And this is what sends people to proverbial war. It's a matter of life and death. But fundamentally, and actually I'm going to read a section of this PBR, the pre-broadcast reflection, that illustrates the story of heaven and hell, and then we'll dig into it. So fundamentally, what's the story of heaven? From a religious standpoint, roughly speaking, heaven is a place of divine perfection where we are reunited with God in perfect harmony. It is a place of perfect unity and joy where we are sustained and nourished by God's infinite love. Heaven is the ultimate reward for those who have faith in God and live according to his will and his word. Roughly speaking. Hell, from a religious standpoint, hell is a place of eternal separation from God, where the damned are condemned to suffer unbearable torment and punishment. It is seen as the ultimate consequence for those who have denied or refused to accept God's love and mercy, and instead have chosen to live a life of sin. Aww. These are illustrations that are attempting to illustrate the difference between seeing the truth of life and not seeing the truth of life. When you see the truth of life, you discover that there is a complete absence of fear, in such a way that there's nothing real in life to be afraid of. Human beings are not afraid of anything in reality. They're afraid of the mind's content. There was a whole nother video on that. And when you see beyond the mind's fear, the only thing that's left is love. And this place of heaven illustrates this discovery. You know, and it's been told, right, that in heaven, the streets are paved in gold. It's a story that's saying what? It's just amazing. It's so amazing. I can't describe it. What is it like? It's like the streets are paved in gold. It's like everyone gets their own mansion. Is that what it really is? Well, no. Well, what is it really? You have to see it for yourself. You have to experience it for yourself. All I can do is make comparisons that may or may not pique your interest to investigate what is real and true. And likewise, when you don't see the truth of life, when you're not connected to that, then what you see is fear. There's lots of fear. And what does fear give rise to? Suffering. And all of its flavors. Agitation, anxiety, stress, loss, shame, guilt, judgment. All of these things that could be referred to as emotional disturbances are reflective of hell. That's what hell is like. Hell is like being separated from love. Pretty simple, yeah? But I know even in the simplicity, it could still be tough if you have that intense conditioning of religious dogma, which is fine. No worries. I've been there. And I'm speaking from that place. I'm speaking as one who grew up in a Christian environment, convinced I was going to hell. And you know what's interesting too in that dogma is that you're either afraid you're going to hell or you're afraid you won't make it to heaven. So either way, there's some fear there. right? There's like this little concern, even if you're doing all the right things. What if I don't get in? What if I mess up? It's quite silly. Anything that has to do with the loss of something in the future, like if there's a prize in the future, there will always be anxiety about it. Because if it's in the future, then it exists in the realm of the unknown, right? Like you can't actually know it. And the reason you can't know it is because it's not real. It's not true. It's not here. It's not now. It's not present. It's not alive. And so there's no certainty in it. There will always be the element of the unknown. And where there is the element of the unknown, there's a great opportunity for doubt. There will be doubt because you don't really know. And so with a future prize, especially one that seems like the ultimate prize, there will always be that slight agitation that you might not get it. And so the truth of life 100% isn't referring to some other moment than now, because the truth of life is now. And if you're going to see the truth of life, if you're going to see reality, you're going to see it now. Because that's where it is. And all of these stories, they're such beautiful invitations to just question what you think is real. Right? Like if it's being expressed that there's something called heaven and it's now, that's such an invitation to question maybe why you don't see it. And to question what it is you think you do see. But so often, especially wrapped in dogma, people suffer lives of quiet desperation, waiting for the future moment, waiting to die so that they can get that prize. You know what? It reminds me, and I say this in the most gentle way. It's just so beautiful. And so there's just zero judgment in any of this. But on so many occasions in my life, especially when I was younger, I would encounter old preachers, and they'd be doing their thing, talking about how it's just a matter of time before Jesus comes back and we all get to go to heaven. And they're just waiting and waiting and waiting, and they're convinced it's going to happen before they die. It's super sweet. It's super sweet. And it doesn't happen. I think this is important to look at, not just in the context of Christianity, and I'm not beating up on Christianity. I actually think it's quite beautiful, especially given a certain context that isn't wrapped up in fear. But what I am suggesting for all religions and all traditions, especially for those listening, especially if you're still listening, that there doesn't need to be any pushing or clinging to any one story. There doesn't need to be a seeking for which story is the right story. Because what they're all pointing to is an opportunity to discover the same thing. And what it really comes down to, and this makes it so much easier, is resonance. What resonates with you? If one story resonates, sweet, go with it. But go with it as a pointer, not as if it's the end all be all. No need to cling to it as if it's the answer. Because when you do that, you will start projecting that other people's story is the wrong story. And that is just an expression of fear. That's a fear that your story is the wrong story. And so to avoid that fear, we start saying that other people have the wrong story. But what's the truth? It's all just story. And it's so true, though. It's so true what all of these things are pointing to. The opportunity for this profound discovery. And this is, of course, why you're here listening. Because you recognize it. Maybe you've seen it. That there is some, let's just call it magic to life, that is extraordinarily beautiful, but yet we seem to be so preoccupied with the mind's content. We seem to be so preoccupied with the world's illusions. And we find ourselves being exhausted. And of course, it's in those moments where we become the most open, where we effectively admit how lost we are, and we become still and open. And it's in that opening where life has a possibility to show us something more true, which is actually quite profound. And maybe you've recognized this in your own experience, that your profound moments of insight, life discovery, have often come after collapsing through suffering. Whether it's a perceived loss, perceived disappointment. So often we can be so lost and confused where in some way we just admit that we don't know what's going on. We don't know what's real and we don't know what's true. And that ends the whole game of pretending, right? Like I'm hurting so much that everything I've tried isn't working. And if everything you've tried isn't working, then where do you go? Right? In some way, as a manner of speaking, that's when you go to God. And that's what people do. And then in that, there's often a discovery that allows you to see things with brand new eyes. I know I've mentioned it before, but it seems well placed right now to illustrate heaven and hell. And that is the story of the devil, which is the creator of hell. And again, the devil, it's a story. It's a story that illustrates something. Isn't that so funny? How we can be in a space of fear where we think it's a real thing. And then in our fear of it, we essentially create it, which is the funny thing about fear. To fear something, whatever you fear, you're effectively saying it's real. The story of the devil illustrates what it's like to be in opposition to God. Now, in plain language, what does that mean? It means to fight what's true. And what happens when you fight what's true? Life sucks. How do you fight what's true? You hold on to a lie. And I've told this story many times, but just very briefly to summarize. As the story goes, there's a bunch of angels in heaven. There's a big celebration. Everyone's worshiping God. And the devil, not the devil at the time, but an angel at the time, sees that there's a party going on. He's like, this is cool, but why is everyone worshiping God? You know what he says? But what about me? But what about me? And if you listen to the earlier broadcast today, no self, that's what I'm referring to. But what about me? And he says, I want to be worshiped. And then he gets banished from heaven. Not that he gets kicked out, but he banishes himself. He doesn't want to play that game anymore. He wants to be God. And so he plays little tricks by promising things in the future if only you worship him. I think there's a story in the Bible somewhere about Jesus in the desert being tempted by Satan. And the devil's essentially saying, if you do X, Y, and Z, then I'll make you special. Essentially. Which is essentially saying, if you worship me instead of God, then I'll make you important. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that the voice of the ego? It's the same thing. Ego is the aspect of ourselves that is in opposition to life. It's in opposition to the truth. It wants to survive. The ego wants to be its own separate thing. It wants to be validated. It wants to be worshipped. It wants to be proven to be real. And it's not real. And this is what the human seeking is doing for the separate self. Trying to be real in the world. Validate me. See me. And yet, from a religious standpoint, and again, I'm using words to point, everything belongs to God. Everything. But the ego says, I want something. But it's not so much that it belongs to God and God's keeping it from you. It's that everything is God. God created everything. And so it's just not within the realm of the mechanics for that which is separate to have that which goes with wholeness. And you see, that's the opposition, which is essentially saying, I don't want life to be life. I want it to be how I want it to be so that I can validate myself. And what do you get with that attitude? You get hell. And as it relates to heaven after you die, what this illustrates is heaven after the death of ego. When the ego no longer tries to survive, when the ego is no longer alive, then what is seen is heaven. And again, the ego doesn't really die because the ego isn't really alive. It's imaginary. And so again, it's just pointing. This is effectively when we get out of our own way. When we stop chasing illusions that will never give you what you're really looking for. Which is also like saying something in you is hungry and you're trying to feed it with a menu. Something in you is thirsty for the truth of life, but you're trying to find it in the most impossible ways. And we can look at this gently, how much our human difficulty and our suffering is birthed through trying to be validated in the world. It's almost the difference between what are you serving? And again, using words and language since we're on the theme, are you serving God? Or are you serving your ego? Are you in service to the whole of life? Or are you in service to who you think you are? And if you're in service to who you think you are, you will see life as an obstacle. You'll see it as in the way. And that's not serving life. And this is all birthed from a very innocent misunderstanding. It's not wrong. It's not bad. It's a very understandable misunderstanding. So no worries. It's important to recognize how the story itself doesn't matter. What matters is what it points to. For example, and it's just so fascinating how we as human beings argue and fight about these things, about what was or what wasn't was thousands of years ago. Did this happen? Did it not? And it seems so important. Like, for example, and again, just to illustrate, take the example of Jesus restoring sight to blind people and raising the dead. Okay? First and foremost, it's a story. And for me, the question of, is that true? The answer is, don't know, wasn't there. Other than that, it's irrelevant. It has no bearing whatsoever on my experience. But what I can see is a tremendous pointing to the truth in those stories in such a way that if we're telling a story and we say Jesus, the Son of God, restored sight to blind people, the way that I interpreted that is the truth of life was shared and people who didn't see it can now see it. And it is as equal to a blind person being able to see. It's that amazing. And it is that amazing. And again, for someone who doesn't have the context, then it doesn't seem amazing. Like, what do you mean that seeing the truth of life could be as amazing as going from blind to not blind? And even raising the dead. If you're suffering this life and something in you is just not alive, right? Like, you don't want to be here. Life sucks. No. And then you see the truth of life. That is like being raised from the dead. 100%. And so that story makes sense. That the truth of life could raise someone from the dead. And so I don't care if it was true or not, because honestly, there's no performance of a miracle that I could see in this life that compares to seeing behind the mind's bullshit. True story. Right? There's nothing that compares. And again, my experience. There's nothing that I've encountered in this life that even begins to compare to the experience of seeing the truth of life. Seeing beyond the illusion. Seeing that there's absolutely nothing to be afraid of. Because in that, life becomes the most glorious landscape of love and play. Like, holy shit. And to see that, wouldn't trade it for anything. You couldn't give me $1 billion to take that away. Because it's worth more than that. And my God, I could go on and on and on. But I think that is a nice little introduction to the topic. And so heaven is now. Wake up, Buttercup. The truth of life is waiting to be seen now. The pointers throughout the thousands of years has been pointing to the truth of life now, and it's always here now. It's never not here. And it's just waiting to be seen. And it is the remedy to all suffering. 100%. And again, for one that doesn't have the context, I can understand how insane that sounds. That makes perfect sense. Nonetheless, I'm going to keep talking about it. All right. Let's switch to Q&R, questions and reflections, and see if there's anything you guys would like me to speak to. And then we will transition out with a short and sweet guided meditation. Oh my goodness. I'm going to admit that I'm so joyfully addicted to carbonated water. Comment of our heaven here is corrupted, not what was intended to be. If it's corrupted, it's not really heaven. Heaven is incorruptible. And so if heaven seems corrupted, it's not really heaven. That would be hell. That sounds like hell. A heaven that's corrupted. And again, to look out into the world and to not see heaven is to not see reality. And even as that comes out of my mouth, I understand how insane that might sound. But it's pointing to a profound truth. Let me put it this way. When you wake up, the whole world wakes up. When you wake up, the whole world wakes up. That's a good one. And we're looking for it. It's so interesting. We're looking for heaven out there rather than letting heaven be seen from behind our eyes, and then heaven touches everything that we see. We go about it in a backwards way. We think that what we're seeing is out there, but what you're actually seeing is your own seeing. Gosh, this is so profound. We are under the hypnosis that there is a world out there that we didn't create. And if you're not seeing heaven, you're seeing your creation of hell. Said super gently. And I understand that if someone's in pain, then that can sound super offensive. Which is why when people say things like that, they crucify them. That's exactly what happens. Because it's misunderstood. It's like it's such a beautiful invitation to see something, but when we're hurting, we just refuse to see it. And we want to shoot the messenger. Nika asks, how do you see heaven if you're seeing hell? You know, Nika, it's not a how question. How implies you have to do something, which implies it's in the future. Which implies it's not here. And this really speaks back to a profound willingness to see heaven. Let me put it this way. If you don't see heaven, it's because you don't want to. That's a good way to put it. You want something else. And it's very easy to find what else you want because your suffering will be wrapped around it. In fact, whatever you're suffering over is what you're saying that you want more than to see heaven. And as human beings, we are adorably obsessed with all the things that we want. We want to be approved of. We want to be liked. We want to be loved. We want all sorts of things that validate our separate sense of self. You know what? It also reminds me of the story in the Bible where, and again, my playful apologies, I don't know these stories well. But it's like there was a man who saw Jesus doing his thing and was like, hey, you're cool. I want to follow you. And Jesus says, okay, go sell everything that you own and then come follow me. And the dude's like, I don't know about that. Right? And see, that's a story. That's a pointer. It's not saying that in order to follow the truth, you have to sell everything you have. It's a pointer. Mostly to see your agitation of letting go of everything. To see all the things we're holding on to, all the things that we think are more important than the truth of life. And over time, as we go through this journey, haven't you noticed this epic letting go of more and more shit? It's like at one point in your life, you thought so many things were important. And then after you collect some years, you're like, wow, that just wasn't important at all. And you let it go. And as you let it go, it was like also letting go of a burden. And as you let go of that burden, you saw a little bit more of heaven. And that's exactly what this is. It's letting go of all your burdens. Those things that you're holding on to, you think they're some sort of prize, but they're really just a burden. And it's a real opportunity to let it all go. It's an opportunity that is extended to every human being, but there's no requirement. There's no demand. You're free. You're free. You're free to run around and be in opposition to the truth of life. You're free to run around and try to hold on to things that cannot be held on to. You're free to run around and try and make people love you, which is impossible. You're free. And the more you pay attention to all that running around, you'll see that you're just driving yourself crazy. You'll see that it's just not working. And when you really, really, really see that it's not working, something opens up in you that's willing to let it go, whether it's a little bit or a lot. Yay. Okay. Let's do this guided meditation. Glad you enjoyed it, Lori. I did see some donations come in. Thanks, guys and gals. All right, meditation time. Let's go. Welcome to this moment. Here we are, right now. Let's just take a very brief moment to allow the breath to bring us back to right now. In the most simple way, we're just being together. There's nothing to do. There's nowhere to go. We are just resting in a beautiful permission to just be. Can we notice in the most compassionate and self-forgiving sort of way just how much we make life difficult when it doesn't have to be? We can recognize all of our clinging, trying to hold on to that which cannot be held on to. Trying to control that which cannot be controlled. And we simply become exhausted. So, right now, let's just take a break. Let's come back to life in this moment and see that we don't need to hold on to anything. Nothing needs to be controlled. Everything can be released. You see, my friend, there's so much that the mind thinks is happening. It imagines so many things to be afraid of. But right here, right now, there's nothing to fear. Sure, you can go looking in your mind. You can create imaginary monsters. But those monsters are not here right now. In fact, they're never here right now. They will forever and always only be in the mind. And so let's come back to reality. Breathe into this moment. Yes, we get lost. That's okay. That's okay. We get confused. That too is okay. We can always come home to right now and allow ourselves to just rest. And it's in this stillness, beyond all the mind's noise, that we can recognize everything is okay, but only here and now. Thank you for meditating with me today. We can do that, Linda. Send me an email if you feel like that's necessary. Or you can just come. But either way is fine. Sue, fun to see your name pop up. I saw a bunch of donations come in during the meditation. Thank you, guys. Thanks, Gary. Well, I think that's it, folks. I have another one scheduled tomorrow. Same time as the one earlier today. And the topic for that one is interesting. I'm doing a video for solopreneurs. Are there any solopreneurs in the audience? What's it called? I'll have to look here. It's 36. Yeah, it's called How to Charge Practical Price for Solopreneurs. To a lot of people who are solopreneurs, they seem to have difficulty in figuring out how much to charge for their offering. And then also people who are not yet solopreneurs but would like to get out of the proverbial rat race and do their own thing. And they wonder how it's possible and practical. So that might be good for you. I'm such a huge proponent of creating your own value and giving it away to the world, and then having resources come back your way. But there's a practical way to go about it. A practical way that's not coming from fear and lack, so that you can live playfully, abundantly, whatever that means for you. So check that out. Other than that, if you have any topic ideas, send me a message. I always like hearing from you guys. That's great, Kat. And I think I might be doing more stuff focused on that, kind of helping people create consciously in the world from a business standpoint. That's something that I really enjoy. I really enjoy the whole business game and being able to do it in a loving way. And so if you're interested in that kind of stuff, actually let me know. Like, reach out to me. I'd be curious to see where you're at, what your struggles are. Maybe I can throw some bits of wisdom your way. All right. You guys are all welcome. Thank you for the support. And I will catch you next time.